Kingdom. Thank you, Sheon, for joining us. Welcome you. Right. Okay. So we're waiting for Dr. Adedipe, who will soon join us. Thanks, Sheon, for joining us. Well, again, as part of the introduction, the very first one that we did in business sustainability series was a couple of Saturdays ago, and I spoke on managing brands in this very difficult moment. Today is going to be different. Thanks, Sheyi, for joining us. Sheyi Olaniyan. Great. Akinyele Oludare, thank you for joining us. I'm so glad. Yes, Dr. Biodun Adedipe is joining us. Great. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us. It will soon be on Akinyele Oludare. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great. Here comes Dr. Biodun Adedipe. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Biodun Adedipe. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. With pleasure.
Oh, great. Okay, let's just go straight on so that we don't. Paul. Sorry, thank you for joining us. Thank you, people from United Kingdom joining us, from Nigeria. Tosin Agbola, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Now, I'd like to welcome you to Business Sustainability Series, BSS, by Touchstone. And thank you for joining us again. My name is Tunde Ojo. I lead the Touchstone team. Touchstone is probably, just a brief introduction, please permit me, is perhaps the best kept secret in brand strategy and communication consulting. We're in business to make our clients and their brands to be more successful in a complicated and changing world. Our Business Sustainability Series is our initiative to dimension the key drivers of sustainable business growth in a world characterized by crisis, chaos, and complexity. We want to engage entrepreneurs, business leaders, and brand managers in their quest to find solutions, not only to survive, but also to thrive. Today's topic is defining economic indices in the new normal. When I sent the flyer out, I sent it to a friend, and his question was, what is the new normal? So I told them, join us at 3 o'clock. Dr. Adedipe will be defining that for us. The new realities that the world has found itself within a very, very short time. So who is Dr. Biodun Adedipe? He doesn't need introduction, but please, for the purpose of this, let me just say a couple of things about him, and then we just go head on. Dr. Biodun Adedipe is the chief consultant of Biodun Adedipe Associates, a company that is steeped, that has done great jobs in both financial as well as management consulting. Let me say a little bit more about Dr. Biodun Adedipe before we plunge into the business of the day. Dr. Biodun Adedipe is a world-class economist and finance and management consultant. Not just because he obtained a BSc Economics, first class, and PhD in Economics, specializing in corporate finance, but also because he has worked in the World Bank Mission, Nigeria, African region, and has spent over 40 years as university lecturer, researcher, investment banker, International Merchant Bank, and FCMB. First City Merchant Bank. That was the bank before it was renamed First City Monument Bank. Finance and management consultant, and trainer for banks, the Central Bank of Nigeria, and non-financial businesses and not-for-profit organizations. Dr. Biodun Adedipe has worked as Senior Special Assistant to the President. Wow. Financial Sector Development in the Office of the Chief Economic Advisors. This gentleman is well sought out after, both as expert in various committees and commissions concerning the nation. I can't begin to bore you with the list, but I will not leave without telling you that he has served for many years as the chairman of the Central Organizing Committee of Nigeria Economic Summit Group. You know, the organizers of Nigeria Economic Summit, the foremost private sector, public sector dialogue in the nation. And it's a great privilege to have Dr. Biodun Adedipe this afternoon, and we're looking forward to a whole lot, because it's going to bring the subject economics. Every time I look at him, every time I had a discussion with him, he brings the subject of economics alive like no one else. Dr. Biodun Adedipe, you're welcome.
Thank you so very much for having me, Mr. Touchstone Limited.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Now, we need to start with the context of what we are going to talk about. Can you please help us define the journey so far, the journey to what the world is experiencing now, the coronavirus pandemic? What will you call the new normal?
Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Ojo. The coronavirus is a novel one that the world never knew before. And since it began in December 2019, it has actually redefined the world in the sense of the way the crisis has evolved and in fact snowballed into 4 different headings. Ordinarily, one would look at it as health crisis, but as we speak today, it has redefined the life and the economic landscape in such a way that we are dealing with health crisis on the one hand, which is what you might describe as its constituency, but it snowballed from there into economic crisis.
Great. Doctor is getting back. Marcel Okere, thank you for joining us. Wow. This is great. Marcel Okere. Dr. Biodun Adedipe is joining us very soon.
Yeah.
Again. Yes.
Okay.
We have him back. Thank you.
Yeah. That is the problem of infrastructure that we are struggling around.
Yeah, infrastructure problem.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
So sorry about that. So as I was saying, as at early this afternoon, 338,515 people had lost their lives to COVID-19. That's the health dimension. Now, what brought it now into economic crisis is because different nations around the world began to consider how do we respond to this crisis. And then came the issue of partial and total lockdown. And at the last count, over 50% of the global population of over 7.7 billion people were under partial or total lockdown. The latest of them to join, of course, was only last week, and that is Turkey. Now, that seems to be working in a way, because for the countries where this has been practiced, it has more or less helped them to flatten the curve in terms of infections and also the number of lives lost. But the problem now is that it got to a point that when we began to lock down economies, then we realized that a large number, in fact, a large population around the world actually works in the informal sector on the one hand, and also they work in micro, small, and medium enterprises, which of course have their own peculiarity, in the sense that most of them have very shallow pockets. That is to say, the surpluses they had was very little, and therefore some businesses could not be sustained in lockdown for a long period of time. Moreover, also there is the issue of certain sectors of the economy that more or less had collapsed entirely. And we have examples to cite in aviation, in hospitality industry, in tourism, that more or less had totally collapsed. Now that brought the world into what is happening today. and this happened before the end of the first quarter of this year, the global economy had gone into recession. Okay? So there is also the phenomenon that is not yet caught on in terms of conversation of this nature. And that is the fact that because of COVID-19, globalization is dying. And so we see a pattern where most countries now say that, hey, we've seen ourselves depend so much on China. And we saw that completely unravel in the sense that supply chains collapsed. Okay, that of course leading into what economists will describe as demand shock and supply shock. All right? Demand shock means, and I will situate our country to illustrate that, came from the perspective of the fact that you have things that you sell to the rest of the world. But because of COVID-19 and the response by lockdown, many of those that used to buy your product no longer have a need for it in an emergency, so to say. So what everybody is thinking about all over the world is food, primarily, and then medical supplies. Quick and come, either in terms of, anything that can boost immunity to survive COVID-19, because there's no therapeutic drug as we speak now, and no vaccine as well. So, but the primary request will be for personal protective equipment, PPE, for medical and healthcare workers. Now that became in short supply. So there was therefore the demand shock of those producing not able to sell. Now, what is also meant in terms of the new normal that Mr. Ojo mentioned is the fact that we are seeing for the first time crude oil coming into negative price. And let me explain that to our audience. Negative price means I sell crude oil, but because I don't have people that will buy from me, and I find that it will be more expensive if I shut down the production system, because it will be more expensive to restart production. So it is better for me, therefore, to keep production going. And if I do that, it means in the course of time, I will fill up every space I have for storage. Now, if I fill up every storage space onshore, it means I have to begin to consider storage offshore. That means producing crude oil and putting them in tankers on the waters. Now, to hire a tanker that you put crude oil on might cost you between $300,000 and $400,000 per day. All right? The first country to experience the phenomenon of negative price of crude oil happened to be Canada. So, which will appear like I produce crude because I don't have somebody that will take it from me. I now start begging, please, come and take the crude for free. I will also, on top of giving you crude free, pay for transportation. So if I incur additional costs outside of the cost of production of the crude, which I have to dash out, what that means then is that I'm selling my crude at a negative price. Okay? That's a new phenomenon the world never knew until COVID-19. Now, the country that followed that happened to be the USA. That made President Donald Trump to now put a call to Saudi Arabia very quickly and tell them to find a way to agree with Russia so that the glut that triggered this will be addressed. And so what happened was that Saudi Arabia and Russia came on the table, they had an agreement, and then we had the expanded OPEC, which is called OPEC Plus, now come to an agreement that has changed the dynamics. So that beyond the economic crisis, it became a humanitarian crisis, as I mentioned earlier on. Which then means that people are locked down, and now, as the London economist put it, he says COVID-19 brought us to a reality that we never knew before. And that is a choice between life, death, and the economy. Which means if you choose to leave, that means you leave the roads for COVID-19 and stay indoors. All right? But to stay indoors means you have food to eat inside. So which means once you exhaust the food you have inside, and then you turn to your savings or surplus to use that money to also buy fresh supply of food, the moment you exhaust your savings as a household or family or an individual, or you exhaust your surplus as a company, it means the pressure comes on you to go out of the house. So you then have to choose whether to stay back at home and allow hunger to kill you, or you go out of your gate and confront COVID-19 that can also kill as well. So it then became a matter of a choice between life and death and the economy. In fact, we saw this demonstrated only last week, where we saw the picture, in fact, I will say the video on CNN in Lebanon, we have people trooped out of their houses and defied the lockdown order, and now confronted soldiers and policemen carrying weapons on the roads. And they said, look, we cannot stay back in the house because there's no food there. So if you like, kill us. It is between you and COVID-19. Any of you can kill us. We don't care. We saw that live last week. Quick way to prove what we saw in BA Consult about 6-8 weeks ago as a likely development again from COVID-19. That is the humanitarian crisis. But it now did not end there. It became a security crisis. Because when a man gets to an extreme where he cannot find food and regular basic essentials that he lives on, then he will not give any consideration to safety. So at that instance, it's either he now goes out to defy security forces like it happened in Lebanon. We saw a bit of that happen in Nigeria also before our government decided to relax the lockdown. Okay? So you are now dealing with 4 crises simultaneously. The worst we ever knew in the study of economics is a combination of currency crisis and economic recession, which was what Nigeria experienced in 2016. Because I remember vividly then, the central bank invited us in the Consult to do a review of the emerging markets around the world. Historically, was there any country that had a combination of currency crisis and economic crisis? How did they get out of it? So what would be our recipe for Nigeria? That was 4 years ago. But today, the entire world is filled with the same type of problem. Health crisis, economic crisis, humanitarian crisis, and security crisis. And so it then means finding a solution to this will make governments to go pragmatic. In which case, you can't find a solution in the textbook. It's not about everybody thinking of what to do to survive this, first and foremost, and then ensure you strike a delicate balance between health and the economy. Now, there's a whole lot more to that. And that is what brings this in perspective for us as a developing economy. And I think we need to also put that before the audience. And that is the fact that developing economies have 6 peculiar attributes, which in the context we actually describe as vulnerabilities. So we used to see them as attributes, but they're actually now vulnerability. The first of them is that most developing countries are resource dependent. And we can take an example of our country, Nigeria. Nigeria is 87% dependent for foreign earnings on hydrocarbons. And that is talking about crude oil, condensate, and associated gas. Now, that was the figure for 2019. 87% of our foreign earnings, if you look at foreign trade data, was from oil. Okay? So which means if we find ourselves in the situation where we are unable to sell our crude oil, that much of our foreign earnings will more or less disappear. The other side to it is that if you cannot get something to sell to the rest of the world, then the balance will come from what we describe in economics as capital inflows, which has two heads. Either foreign investors invest in your country, or you are able to find some places to borrow money from. We call that capital flows. Okay? Again, if you look at the data for Nigeria, 2019, 67% of foreign investments that came to Nigeria was portfolio in nature. That means those who invest in assets that they can easily liquidate. That is investment in the stock market, in bonds, and the like. That is, it's very easy for them to sell and run back to their country. But that is Nigeria. Now we can take another country to illustrate this. And we picked up Bangladesh. Bangladesh also, you look at it, okay, they are not dependent on oil. But for them, they depend on garments export. Now they produce garments, they export to the USA, they export to Europe, that is European countries. Now, this dominates their export market for garments. But in terms of foreign earnings, Bangladesh depends on export of garments to the extent of 84%. Which you might say, if you put that vis-a-vis Nigeria's oil, they are even worse, so to say. I mean, they are the same league. Now, the second vulnerability of developing countries, which applies to Nigeria, is that they are highly indebted. And what that means is that if they are highly indebted, it means a lot of resources that should be devoted to development will now be put out to service and repay the external debts they are owing. In fact, we saw in the news yesterday that for the either 17th or 19th time in its history. I think it was Mexico that had to now declare that, look, we are unable to meet our maturing obligations to those our country owes money. The third attribute, vulnerability we call it, in the context of COVID-19 is that they also have large informal sectors, which means economic activities that are informal in nature dominate their gross domestic product, which we call GDP. Okay? Now, extending from there, you now find that micro, small, medium enterprises also represent large proportions of their GDP. The latest data we have on Nigeria shows that MSMEs accounted for 54%, a little bit plus, of Nigeria GDP. So that tells you how vulnerable we are. If these ones are those that are most affected by the response to COVID-19, that gives you an idea the extent of the risk Nigeria runs with respect to our GDP. But the other interesting thing about it in Nigeria is this. If you look at manufacturing activities and you do head count of manufacturing firms, in Nigeria, over 90%, if you take head count, of manufacturing companies are SMEs. Which means if we don't address the SMEs, then manufacturing in Nigeria can also suffer a reversal. All right? Another particular vulnerability of developing countries is they have large populations. Take Nigeria, for example, as of February this year, we had an estimated population of slightly over 204 million people. That was the estimate as of February this year. But there is something peculiar about Nigeria's population that is talking about its spatial distribution and, of course, the age distribution. Now, what we call the median age of the Nigerian population is 17.9 years, which means if you line us up from the youngest to the oldest in Nigeria, the person you pick out in the middle is 17.9 years old. So that tells you that we have a large, about 50% of the population less than 80 years of age. All right? So that gives you a dimension of what we'll be looking at. The other peculiarity is the spatial distribution. 4 or 5 years ago, 47% of our population was in the urban areas. But as at the beginning of this year, 51% of our population is now in the urban areas. I know what that would mean. In fact, the pointer to that is what happened to Lagos. In Lagos State, as at 2 years ago, 2018, Lagos had just a little above 60 slums in terms of number. But as at the beginning of 2020, barely 2 years after, there was a count of over 600 slums in Lagos. All right? And this is authentic because the data came from the Lagos State government, official data. All right? Now, the other peculiarity is high poverty incidence. Okay? And what this tells you is what proportion of the population lives below the poverty line. When the Brookings Institution came up with a study 2 years ago, and they said, 80% of Nigerians live below the poverty line, I challenged it. And I asked them, I want to understand as a professional economist, where did you conduct your survey? Number one. Then which sectors did you pick the respondents from? Of course, I never got a response to that. Because I said, if you consider the fact that a large portion of Nigerians work in the informal sector, it then tells me that you have not taken account, for example, of someone who works in Lagos Island and he lives in Agege, how much he spends on transportation going to work 5 times in a week. And that means minimum 20 times in a month. So if you take account of how much he spends on transportation, and consider the fact that the man eats, all right? If he's married, he has a family that he feeds. He also pays house rent. I said, by the time you total all this, it means we run into an error if you measure his life in terms of what he earns. But rather, it's better for you to measure his life in terms of what he spends. And happily, our National Bureau of Statistics took that as a line. So when they were now to do the poverty study, they went by way of tracking expenditure. And I said, the way we define that a Nigerian is poor is when we're able to set a mark as to how much he needs to spend in order to stay alive. And happily, By the time they finished that study, that it of course was national. And I was very sure the study by Brookings Institution couldn't have been national in Nigeria. So MBS did that and put out the report in the last 4 weeks thereabout. And so that data indicated that it's just about 40.1% of our population that is below the poverty line. Yes, 40 is still high, but not anywhere close to the 80% that Brookings Institution claimed, which some of us challenged. But of course, unfortunately, at the time, not many Nigerian economists had the courage to challenge them because they were Americans, all right? And we keep telling them that, look, we know more about our economy and our people than they do. And so to that extent, they need to respect what we put forward. Now, I prepared some slides for this, which I will share with the audience, all right? I will make it available to Touchstone. I can share with all those that attended this. So people will get
Thank you very much.
And facts. So that we can, go on with this discussion. There's a whole lot more on this. Okay, but I also want the audience to know this, that the Nigerian economy, because people always make this blunt statement that it is not diversified. That is not correct. All right? It is not correct to say the economy is not diversified. I have in my slides, which we have, a chart that shows clearly the diversity of economic activities taking place in Nigeria and what each of those sectors is contributing to our GDP. I will see there that for 2019, later data available, agriculture contributed 26.1% to our GDP. And then you see also mining and quarrying contributed 7.5%. And that is where the oil sector is, which I will tell you in a short while, is where the real problem of our economy is. So then, of course, manufacturing contributed 8.7% to our GDP in 2019. Then trade accounted for 16%. And of course, ICT, 13.1%. And then we have real estate, 6.2%. Now, those 6 sectors, agri, mining and quarry, manufacturing, trade, ICT, real estate. If you look at the Nigerian economy in the last 10 years, those 6 sectors have consistently accounted for between 77% and 82% of our GDP. So that gives you an idea of the sectors that contribute the most to GDP in Nigeria, where the bulk of value is being created in Nigeria. So, and you see other various sectors, water supply and sewerage, construction, electricity and air conditioning, transportation, accommodation and food services, arts and entertainment, professional and technical services, administrative and support, public administration, human health and social services, and other services. Various sectors. So the economy is diversified. If there is nothing you take away from this conversation, please take that away. Our economy is diversified. We were privileged to consult in Tara with the National Assembly, different occasions, senators, House of Rep members, and we showed them this chart, and many of them were surprised that nobody ever showed it to them using data to demonstrate that the economy is diversified. Where the problem is what we call a disconnect between the oil economy and the non-oil economy. Oil contributed 7.3% of our GDP in 2019. Non-oil sector contributed 92.68%. All right? But as I said earlier, foreign earnings is dominated by oil. So the sector that gives you most of your foreign earnings is not the one that contributes to job creation. That's where the problem is. We call it disconnect. So the real challenge they're facing government, especially taking advantage of this COVID-19 response, is to address this disconnect between the oil sector and the non-oil sector. I think also I need to make a quick remark on this, because this is a phenomenon happening all around the world. Now, COVID-19 struck, government needed to respond to it, and to respond to that and ensure that despite the lockdown, that SMEs and then people in the informal sector, and by the way, I need to mention this, even in the largest economy in the world, the US, which contributes about 24% of global GDP, even in the US, they face the same problem. We call it the informal sector in Nigeria, but in the US, they refer to them as self-employed. Okay? So the US government put out a stimulus package for the self-employed. And we have on record, as at 2 days ago, that 2 million such people had already drawn $6 billion put out by the US government. So I did a quick arithmetic, and that's like $3,000 per person. Okay, self-employed. Now, that is in the US. The same is happening all around the world. In United Kingdom, the governments put out, they are still on lockdown as we speak. Okay, their government said if this lockdown is going to be effective, and we don't want SMEs to sack their employees, then we will support the SMEs with a certain percentage of their payroll cost. And the UK government proposed to support them with 80% of their payroll cost. Which is like saying to Touchstone, say, Touchstone, please, we know you have to respond to COVID-19 because there will be a strain on your resources. You are not generating revenue the way you used to do before COVID-19. So to ensure you remain in operation, to remain a business on the one hand, to ensure also you don't sack your employees, please give us your payroll cost. Then our government will give you 80% of that to ensure you remain in business, to also ensure that you keep your staff. That is what UK has done. Okay? Now, what has happened is that every government around the world is looking for money from wherever they can get it. And we remember clearly in BA Consult, we observed this 2 weeks ago in the US. States had exhausted all their resources, and I will mention 2 of them. New York State got to a point where they said, all that we have as reserve has been exhausted in fighting COVID-19. We need federal support. And I remember hearing myself directly, not that I was told. The governor of New York State in the US said, if the federal government say they can't find a place to borrow money, or they have no reserve again they can draw from, then they should print money. Okay? That is, mandate the Federal Reserve, our own central bank here, to print money in order for us to fight COVID-19. Then we saw also the governor of California State said, look, when they entered 2020, at the beginning of this year, they had over $6 billion as surplus in their budget for the year. But by the time they began to respond to COVID-19, as of last week, that entire budget surplus had melted. California State was already in a deficit of slightly over $10 billion. That just to give 2 examples. So when people say that, oh, why is Nigerian government borrowing to fight COVID-19? It's like they have not really understood the fact that it's a global phenomenon. Every country, every government is borrowing. But to give you a picture for Nigeria that will give some bit of comfort for our audience. Now, we have also here the data of Nigeria's public debt as at December 2019. Let's say data available. You will see in the slides 3 pie charts. One pie chart was to show that the bulk of what government owes in Nigeria is domestic, not even foreign. So when people make so much noise about foreign debt, it's a misplaced noise that they are making in our own understanding of looking at the real data. All right? The data shows that the bulk of what governments owe in Nigeria is domestic. So if we are also going to respond appropriately to COVID-19, that should be part of government's agenda. We haven't heard them say anything in that direction. Okay? Then, of course, domestic debt. The bulk of that is owed by the federal government, not even the state governments and local government. The third one is external debt. And I will make my remark on that and globalization, and then we can engage in question and answer conversation and comment. Okay? External debt. The bulk of that is to what we describe as commercial lenders and the World Bank Group. Between them is about $21.2 billion. But the G20, the World Bank and IMF came together at a meeting early April to agree what they should do in order to assuage the problems countries that are highly indebted were facing. So what they did was to look at countries in 4 different categorizations. The first category were those that are described as low-income countries. Nigeria featured there. And why? Our GDP is quite solid. We are well positioned if you line us up with other countries of the world. Nigeria is among the top 30 in the world in terms of GDP size. In fact, we've been floating between 24 and 27 in terms of position in the last 10 years. But one other peculiarity is that our population is large. So by the time you divide the GDP of Nigeria by our population, you arrive at a per capita income that is very low. That was what brought Nigeria into that category of countries that will be helped by the G20, World Bank, and IMF. as a response to COVID-19. Okay? So now, the other side to it is that the countries that are highly indebted, before COVID-19, the projection, in fact, this data was put out by the IMF, that by 2021, Nigeria will be spending 70% of its foreign earnings servicing foreign debt. Okay? But as part of the new normal that Mr. Ojo mentioned, what has happened is that the World Bank and IMF, that's the World Bank Group, had offered to do something unprecedented. It has never happened in the history, or let me say the economic history of dealing with financial crisis. And we have a record of over 800 years of financial crisis. But never at a time had the World Bank and IMF, it has existed since 1944 anyway, till date. We call them Bretton Woods institutions. Never at a time had they put out an offer to write off certain category of external debt of countries. And that is where Nigeria will also benefit. They call them IDA and then IFAD, IDA and IFAD loans. Now, when we check the data, we found that those two windows, Nigeria has indebtedness of $9.69 billion, which means if the World Bank Group will do what they said they will do for those two categories of countries, low income, highly indebted, then $9.69 billion for Nigeria's debt, external debt, will be written off. That again is unprecedented. It's a new number because it had never happened before. So my last remark before we start conversing, because many things will also come out through that, is the fact that globalization is dying. And what do we mean that globalization is dying? Every country now is looking inwards. And I will give a quick illustration of that with examples from a few countries. Now, when COVID-19 struck in December 2019, that was when the crisis began. But it became a global crisis in February this year. That was when it became a pandemic, as declared by the World Health Organization. It became an economic crisis March 2020. It became humanitarian crisis by April 2020. Then it became a security crisis by May 2020. So 4 crises that we are dealing with globally. So now, at the initial stage, China being the first one to be impacted, was the first to also lock down. And for that reason, China also was the first to begin gradual reopening of its economy. All right? So the rest of the world is learning from China how to reopen the economy and also what the implication of that will be for the economy and the players in it. And this is what has happened. Now, at some point, when China had more or less put COVID-19 under control, Europe and the USA ordered for PPEs in particular, that is personal protection equipment for healthcare workers. But Europe got to China to place its order ahead of the USA. Now, initially, the response of the US president was that, COVID-19 was a Chinese disease. The Americans didn't need to worry about it. But by the time they got to the end of February and then early March, they discovered that it started affecting America the same way China suffered in the Wuhan province. But for US, the real problem was in New York. Because New York is similar to Lagos in Nigeria. Large population within a small space. And so the chances of contagion and of course community spread of the disease very high. So at that time, US now ordered for PPE from China. Also ordered for ventilators. But when they got to China, they found that Europe had got there ahead of them. So China said, hey, wait a minute. We have to supply the orders to Europe first. And then the US president picked up the phone and called China and said, look, if you don't put us ahead of the Europeans, we will restart the Sino-American trade war. And so China put the Europeans aside and started attending to USA. That became a fight. This is the real stark fact. There was a fight between Europe and USA on this. Okay? That set them to begin thinking that shouldn't we be producing these things ourselves instead of depending on China? Then the next one to follow was what we saw now happen in United Arab Emirates. This happened just last week. They took a position and said, look, we will not import face masks from China or anywhere again. We will produce locally. of course, USA also in the last 2 weeks now started, they came up and said, look, they tested the face mask they were importing from China, and they found that about 50% of the consignment was defective. So the US president also signed an executive order that will enable companies in the US to produce most of the PPEs, face masks, and the rest of them that they require. So everybody is looking inward. The Japanese government now put out a bulky sum of money and said, we have seen how depending on China has made all of us become so vulnerable to COVID-19 and its impact. So for that not to happen in future, let's producing our own thing in Japan. So as we speak now, the Japanese Bank of Japan, that's their central bank, put out the equivalent of $230 billion for that purpose. And that is what our central bank governor said here in Nigeria. That Nigeria should seize this opportunity to actually begin to look inwards with all seriousness to produce what we need for ourselves. Which, of course, Mr. Tunde Ojo was part of the conversation where we had the economic summit in 2016. And we adopted the theme made in Nigeria. Which, of course, I always explain to people this way, that there are 3 legs to economic activities. It's either you are in production, that's the production leg, or you are in consumption, or you are in trade, which is in between. All right? So what that means then is that whatever you are doing as an economic agent, you will fall in any of those 3 planks of economic activities. So but the problem with Nigeria was that we were producing what we were not consuming, and we were consuming what we were not producing. So what COVID-19 has brought now as a new normal, that I've cited examples of countries for you. USA, United Arab Emirates, there are 7 of them in there, and of course, Japan in particular. Those ones came out frontally and said it, that is what they are going to do. And I will give an example here. BMW, Peugeot, Nissan. The moment China shut down, they discovered that they had components enough to produce for 2 weeks. So they put out a warning to their customers and said, after 2 weeks, we are going to close down our factories. No new BM cars, no new Peugeot cars, no new Nissan cars. Which was what Japanese government responded to now. By saying, let's look inward. So if that is happening, then you will discover that globalization as we have known it, even though it has suffered twice in the last 10 years, with the financial crisis of 12 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, globalization suffered then. And of course, we also saw what happened with the recent currency crisis in some countries. But now there is the COVID-19 pandemic that is making everybody look inward. Okay? So there's a whole lot more, but Mr. Joe, I think we can go conversational at this point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Biodun Adedipe. Thank you very much. And all of you who have joined us. I've seen Mr. John Oparo join us at the end, Managing Director of System Specs, and so many others. What a wonderful time together. Every time I listen to Doctor, I get excited about economics, but I also tell myself, I'm glad that I'm not one, because how do you compete with a man with a world-class knowledge such as this? He has given us insight, the depth, the breadth, and the depth and the length of the new normal, where we have found ourselves from a global perspective, and he has touched quite a lot. Now, we need to start looking at questions. How we want him to start looking at, what will you want if you were to advise our president? What will you want him to do for a country that you have mentioned? I mean, resource dependent, high population, and so many factors that you have mentioned. How do you start growing a company like ours? A company that is, a country that you said is diversified but highly dependent on oil. What do we, what do we start doing? And how do you advise organizations, companies, business managers and leaders?
Yes.
How should they respond to the implications of COVID-19, not just from the global perspective now, but from Nigerian realities? And then we can start having all the questions so that Dr. Adedipe can. I have a couple of other questions, but can you address that quickly?
Okay.
Thank you for joining us, Tunde Adedipe. Yomi Fane, Wi-Fi Gade, and many others. God bless you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much. Now, the first one, let me even put it plainly, that some 2 weeks ago, we actually sent a memo to the presidency that we did jointly with one of our partners, a legal firm, a commercial law firm, that's in Edu. So what we did in that memo was to look at what government has done so far. The participants on this forum will get my slides, as I said. They will see that on slide number 11. There we summarize the intervention variously that have been done by both the fiscal and monetary authorities. All right? So we see that across monetary, healthcare, fiscal stimulus, fiscal adjustment, and others. But what we have also done was to aggregate all of this and now compare that with Nigeria's GDP. Our GDP for 2019 was 145.64 trillion naira. That was our GDP in 2019. So we put all of these interventions variously by the fiscal authorities and the central bank. We aggregated them and we discovered that they came to 3.86% of our GDP. We then looked around the world. What are other countries doing? We checked what USA has done. USA has done about 40% as we speak. And they are aiming to do 20% of their GDP as an intervention to deal with the economic crisis emanating from COVID-19. We looked across at China, we looked at Indonesia, we looked at, of course, China is also there, we looked at Zimbabwe in Africa. In fact, what we did was to look at countries that had a little high percentage. And then, in a conversation we benefited from with some Indian economists, they indicated then, because India was doing less than 3% at the time, and they advised their own government that for India to successfully intervene in such a way that its economy will not collapse by reason of COVID-19, they needed to upscale the intervention to 5% of their GDP. Then as we decided that, we found that only last week, the Indian government responded to that. And in fact, they put out a package that will upscale the intervention by their government to 10%. Okay? So meaning 10% of India's GDP will be used to intervene in the economy. So we also advise our government to, in the next round of intervention, increase the ratio of the aggregate stimulus from 3.86% to at least 5%. I know the NESG actually recommended 10%. I will also be very comfortable if our government will do 10% of our GDP, as NESG said, because that will give us a lot of comfort. But it is not enough to put out the stimulus. And that is why it connects to the second question. What we also said government should do is to focus on the informal sector and especially the MSMEs. In fact, when we saw the data put out by the Nigerian National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria, last week, about the headcount of companies, we found that micro enterprises account for over 99% of registered businesses in Nigeria. Wow. Then SMEs, of course, less than 1%, but the large enterprises, in terms of headcount, were only 0.004% of the number of enterprises in Nigeria. So that is a clear indication to the government as to where they should focus attention in intervention. All right? And of course, like I said earlier on, this is not a time to worry about borrowing. It's about finding money from anywhere. And of course, we reminded them about what the Malaysians did in response to the Asian crisis of 1997. The Malaysian government looked for money from everywhere to attack that crisis. And what they did was to borrow money from the pension fund, in their own case. They also borrowed money from the central bank, the Bank Negara de Malaysia, as it is called. They also took money from banks that were strong and were able to support that. And then government itself also put money. So four sources the Malaysians tried then in 1997 to ensure the economy recovered the year after. That was in 1998. So what we are looking at now is that if government will put out money, those monies should be aimed at the MSMEs in particular, which of course dominate the formal sector. Now coming back to companies, what should they be doing? Now, there are 5 things we call inescapable issues. All right? Number one is lifestyle change. There's an irreversible change of lifestyle in terms of social distancing, in terms of personal hygiene rules, in terms of work-life balance, even work from home. All right? Those are changes that are irreversible in the light of COVID-19 and its impact on business. Secondly, because most of your staff now have to work from home, it means we have entered an era where companies will have to redesign the jobs of their employees. We call it job redesign. Which means you have to re-examine the content of every job. You have to re-examine the value of each job, in which case someone will retain his or her job based on the value they contribute to their employers. All right? That has become now an issue in the front burner. We used to avoid that in some cases because of sentiment pre-COVID-19. But COVID-19 has made it very clear that if BA, for example, will keep any staff, that staff must be somebody who is contributing value, that is helping us to solve problems for our clients. That's what we are in business for. So every business also, you must come to terms with that reality, that you are in business to solve the problems of your customers or clients, as the case may be. So in which case, there must be a link between the job of every staff with what your company delivers.
Hello, I'm sorry. Had an outage there. Dr. Adedipe is going to rejoin, and we'll continue. Thank you very much.
So I think I'm back now. So sorry about that. Again, infrastructure challenge.
Thank you.
So, as I was
Thank
saying,
you, Doctor.
all over the world, we've seen pent-up economic energy when people were locked down. And so what we envisaged in BA Consult actually happened in China. You will see a slide here, which I'm not talking to right now because of our time, but where we said that once economies begin to reopen, most economic actors will likely concentrate on food, then basic essentials of life, especially healthcare. So, and that has been confirmed happening in China. So what it then means is that the disappearing rational economic man has returned. In the sense that people now are rational in their choices of what to buy and what not to buy. So most of them are holding tightly to their wallets. Outside of food and basics of life, they are holding on to their wallets. So how do companies like Touchstone, BA Consult, in services thrive in such environment? What it means essentially is that every business, and this applies to every business organization, you must recognize that because of the irreversible changes to human behavior, consumer behavior, and the implication for your business model, you have to recognize that this is the time to maximize digitization. If your company is not yet in the digital space, this is the time you need to get there and get a footprint. If you're already in the digital space, this is the time to strengthen that. And that is the big message that we put out to companies generally. And this is a global phenomenon. The second thing is that this is the time for you to make a plan. Which means you don't wait until post-COVID-19 when the economy fully opens. You have to make a strategic plan. And that plan, we have 3 plans. The first component of the plan will cover the period between now, May 2020, and June 2020, which we tag as the period of the second quarter of 2020. Then we have another plan that will cover the second half of 2020. Then there will be a plan that will take care of 2021 and beyond. And these are the elements in each of them. The first plan, what you must do right now, as I said, you need to intensify digitization. We describe that as delivering end-to-end value digitization, which means you look at your clients and talk about the value you are delivering to them. For example, this is value being delivered by Touchstone, okay, to its stakeholders, because Touchstone is not asking you to pay for this, all right? So Touchstone, therefore, is delivering value to you that you are not paying for. That is part of what we recommend, that every business within this period, you must be at the faces of your clients or your customers, because this COVID-19 and its implications can make customers easily forget you. So That means you must keep up communication. Then you need to stress test your business model. Now let me explain that. There's a big difference between strategy and business model. Strategy talks about where we want to go, how we intend to get there, what we need to get there, and of course, ultimately, what we likely achieve. That is the summary of strategy. There's a lot more to that, okay? Now, the second leg to it is what we call business model. Business model talks about how you will make money out of your strategy. And the whole idea simply is that for any business to be sustainable, and this is something that we propagate even in the microfinance space, that it is not enough to say that you are intervening socially in microfinance, that every institution in that space must also be sustainable. That means must make profit. So how we Touchstone make profit, it comes from your business model. And that is how to convert your strategy into money. Okay? You need to assess the impact of COVID-19 on your customers, on your assets and your liabilities. Okay? How will this affect our customers? Because the extent of its impact on our customers will determine whether we get fresh business from them. And if some of those customers that we experienced in BA Consult owed you money before COVID-19, shut down everything, then you have to also think of how to get them to pay you. All right? Otherwise, you won't be able to meet your maturing obligations. But most importantly also is, how do we get new business? So you are talking about if happily you have some jobs on hand, how do we get them done working from home? Then those we have worked for, how do we get them to pay us? Then to get new jobs that will keep us in operation, how do we get new jobs? So it means also in the new normal, you must be operationally and cost efficient. And that leads into what to do with your assets. We call it right sizing across all your resource spectrum. Look at your human resources, which we say are the most viable assets. Let me throw this in as, in the lighter mood. There's a saying that people are not your assets, right? But the right people are your assets. So, and that reality is now brought forward by COVID-19. So that it's no longer people are the assets, but the new normal says that the right people are your assets. So if you want to now analyze how your people relate with your business and customers, then you talk about how do we bring them up. The professional staff, the support staff for the professionals, the outsourced staff. So if your company is on lockdown, certainly you won't have a need for outsourced staff. All right? So maybe you begin to consider what many companies around the world have been doing. You send them on leave of absence. Leave of absence means, yes, we still see you as our staff, but for the period you are away, we won't pay you. The only assurance you have is that you are not in the job market. So which means anytime we begin business again, we call you back. And then we begin to pay you. Instead of accumulating payroll debt to such employees. Look at your assets as well. Do you use small generator or big generator? We looked at that in our office in BA Consult. And we said, if the number of people going to the office is simply 2, only 2 of them are going to the office now. The rest of us are working from home. The outsourced staff are on leave of absence. So we said, we have 2 generators in the office. Should we use the big one like we normally joke with ourselves in BA Consult? If you run the big generator, it runs on diesel. It has 4 nozzles. So every time you turn it on, it pumps diesel from 4 nozzles. So it doesn't care the extent of the power you are using. It generates power for you. It's left on you whether you use it or not. So in which case the cost will run insofar as you turn it on. So we told the 2 guys in the office, you really won't need the big generator. Please run on the small generator. So that, of course, has cost implications. You know what that means. You have an office space as well. You need office space, bigger or smaller. If in the era of social distancing, and of course, the issue right now, 60% of your staff are allowed to be at work. If that is the case, then you begin to ask yourself, COVID-19 has proven that many of us can work from home. So if BA Consult now doesn't require Dr. Addedipe to be at work to deliver, it then means if my deliverables are well defined, BA might not need the space they reserve for me as my office space. So begin to look at that also. That is part of what we call rationalizing the resources. Strengthen corporate governance as well. And of course, you need to put in place a hedging strategy? Let me stop there because people will get a lot more in my slides. I have the answer to that comprehensively provided in the slides. Okay.
Thank you once again, Dr. Biodun Addedipe. We can't thank you enough. The questions are long, but I wouldn't want to bore quite a whole lot of us. I just want us to ask a couple of questions, and then we start cruising to a close. Thank you, everyone that has joined us. I know that this has been a great, the time you spend with us is very worthwhile. And once again, before the question, this is Touchstone's initiative to engage with the business community and leaders and managers of brands, and find solutions in the new normal. What should business be doing? And we are fortunate. We have the good fortune of having a world-class economist and management consultant in the person of Dr. Adedipe, headlining this. And we're going to do this from time to time. Next Saturday is another event. Just watch out. A couple of questions, from the audience. Why unemployment rate if Nigeria is this diversified? A gentleman is asking, or is it a lady, why do we have this high unemployment rate? If indeed the Nigerian economy is that's the first one. I want you to take about three. Okay, what's your advice on the state of infrastructure in Nigeria? Adding to the cost of doing business. We all know the challenges that we are facing. And then the last one is it's not the last one. One of the questions I asked is that, how do you get, what is the price? What's the place of corruption in the new normal? That's the question, but I can make this a lot larger. Part of the Nigerian question, the Nigerian challenge is that even if we're borrowing money, Nigerians have not come to trust the leadership of the country to say that the money borrowed will be expended for the purpose. We have heard of palliatives, we have heard of money being spent by the government. The story from the side of government is different from the people on the street. They are not feeling, for goodness sake, from state to state and from federal government. So can you just quickly address those three issues of unemployment in a so-called, if you like, diversified economy? You say it's diversified, and we don't have any reasons to argue that. You are the expert. And then two is your advice on the state of infrastructure and the issue of cost. I think you have mentioned answers to that, but it may not be a bad idea to revisit that. And then, what's the place of corruption? Which is endemic in our environment. And then we look at some other questions and we go on.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the first one, I will put it this way: why is the unemployment rate very high in Nigeria? Now, I will dig back, not to just recent times. Look at the Nigerian economy from year 2000. That's in the last 20 years. Now, between year 2000 and year 2014, the average growth rate of our GDP was 6.2%, one of the highest in the world. Okay? But there was something peculiar about our growth of the economy. We were growing the economy, but we were not creating jobs. Now, the reasons for that, I've mentioned one already. The disconnect between the oil and non-oil economy, which means you are generating money from the sale of crude oil, but that money was not being used to develop the non-oil sector. Okay? The other side is that we have been a nation that is highly import dependent. In fact, I will give you some data on that. Now, the latest foreign data available showed that Nigeria was importing monthly goods worth between $1.2 and $1.4 billion. That's every month. Okay? Now, when you now project that for a year, you know what that would mean? That Nigeria will have to spend on imports But not only that, the question will be, what were the things we're importing? Now, up until 4 years ago, we're importing just any kind of quote unquote, and permit me to put it this way, any nonsense. Nonsense means that what you can produce ordinarily. And I've used these examples as far back as 1987, when I was privileged to be among a group of consultants engaged by the World Bank and the federal government of Nigeria to look at the tariff structure in Nigeria. And I made a strong case then that Nigeria had no business importing walking stick, importing toothpicks, and importing safety matches, because those items require very basic technology to produce them. But we still import them anyway. Okay? So now, the issue is this. If you import most of what you consume, that means you are strengthening manufacturing sectors of other countries.
That's right.
It also means that for everything you import, you're actually creating jobs offshore, not locally. All right? That is where the problem is. You are creating offshore by importing so much, on the one hand, and then something came up from a study done in 2014, when we began to look at what began in year 2000, looking at what will happen between year 2000 and year 2050. Okay? Quick led us into talking about Vision 2020 for Nigeria. We're also part of that when the conversation began. But one major thing that came out of that is this. We found that, yes, when we responded to that by introducing reforms in our economy in 2004, Goldman Sachs that came up with the idea that they had identified the BRICS country, that is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and that between 2000 and 2032, that China would likely become the largest economy in the world by year 2032. So, but Nigeria began reforms in 2004, and so what Goldman Sachs now came up with was that, hey, wait a minute, these Nigerians, there's something peculiar about them. That Nigerians, we have capacity to turn anything around, like magic. You will remember what happened in 1998 in Nigeria. For those who remember this history, Nigeria hosted the World Youth World Cup Championship. All right? Before 4 weeks to the event, the grass in our stadium was zero. It was parkland. But in a matter of 2 weeks, we grew natural grass in our stadium. And I remember the leader of the FIFA delegation that came to Nigeria to inspect it. He asked the question, is this artificial grass or natural grass? And we told him it's natural. The man bent down and plucked one of the ears of the grass, and he squeezed it. Water came out of it. He said, what? This is natural. And the remark of the man is that this is the eighth wonder of the world. That was the remark he made. So Goldman Sachs reacted the same way to Nigeria with our reforms. When we came up with the idea of Vision 2020, he said, hey, wait a minute, this Nigeria, they have come again. That there's nothing they set their minds to do. It is like quoting Genesis chapter 6 and verse 11. That there's nothing they set their minds to do that they won't be able to do. Okay? That was their own reaction to it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is the reason many investors around the world started trooping to Nigeria. And that also accounted for our mismanagement of that opportunity. So instead of recalibrating our economy to start creating jobs, we started creating dollar millionaires. What we mean by dollar millionaire is if we consider your net worth, that is the value of your assets, and we put that aside the value of your liabilities, then we can compute your net worth. Then we subtract from your net worth the value of your primary residence, that is where you live with your family. If the figure we have left is equal to or greater than $1 million, then you're a dollar millionaire. So Nigeria started creating dollar millionaires instead of creating jobs. And in fact, by 2014, a study was now done. And by the way, in context, by 2010, there was no single Nigerian that was a dollar billionaire. But by 2014, we had 5 Nigerians who were dollar billionaires. And so a coinage was now made, going beyond the BRICS, going beyond the next level, going beyond the G7, G20, the kind of things we have. CBEX, we also talked about variously. Okay? Before South Africa was added to the BRICS and they changed it to BRIS, all capital letters. All right? Then they came up with Mint. And that's the explanation of this unemployment rate we are suffering today.
Okay.
The needs were 4 countries. They were discovered by January 2014. They were not creating jobs, they were creating dollar millionaires.
Mm-hmm.
And the needs as an acronym came from the first letter of their names: Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. So that was where the coin came from. MINT, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey, that were creating dollar millionaires rather than creating jobs. So, and we have said this repeatedly, the way to go is to deal with infrastructure. In fact, we put that before President Yar'Adua in 2008, when we put a model to the federal government of Nigeria that we could develop what we call infrastructure Nigeria, and model what China did with infrastructure. We gave them a summary, comprehensive one of what China did. That we address question number 2. Okay?
That's
now, what
right.
China did with infrastructure was to look around the world and say, okay, in every key infrastructure area, which country is number 1 in the world? China then set a target for itself to overtake each of those countries. So they set a 30-year program on road development. Their target was to build expressways longer in stretch than that of the USA, which are the longest stretch in the world at that time, 75,000 kilometers of expressway. So China said over 30 years they will overtake the US. By 2007, 3 years after, China had delivered 57,000 kilometers out of a target of 85,000 kilometers. So they revised the delivery date from year 2034 to year 2010. And by 2011, China delivered 85,000 kilometers of expressway, built in a network of 4x8. All right? They now looked at railway. Then they targeted Russia and said Russia was the country at that time with the longest stretch of railway in the world. So China said we target to outcompete Russia in terms of stretch of railway by year 2012. And they actually achieved it, because I witnessed the first load of manufactured goods from China to United Kingdom, which they refer to as Island Europe. I saw the train when it arrived in London, okay, with a ribbon in the front. And they said this train brought manufactured goods all the way from China on rail to London, okay? So they achieved it by 2012. So what did they say they would do about power? Also about IT. ICT, they targeted South Korea. And they said, look, our target is to put as many of our citizens on the internet. We call them netizens. Netizens are citizens on the internet. Okay? By the time we got to 2010, over 200 million Chinese were on the internet as netizens. Wow. But we can see their response to COVID-19. What South Korea has done, and China is also doing. And that is to now create an app that can help you trace those who have contracted COVID-19 and then trace those who contact them. So, for example, my phone can be used. If I download that app on my phone will begin to send data back as to those I stopped. Maybe I stopped and had a conversation with Mr. Ojo. My phone will send data back that I spent 10 minutes with him. I was very close to him. Okay? I also did so time. Then it also does the same. If I only greeted Mr. Ojo and didn't stop, it will send data back that I didn't stop. That I only passed him and maybe waved to him or greeted him momentarily and left. So that way they are using that app now to trace the vulnerability of citizens that download the app on their phones. So in which case, that is the side of technology in dealing with COVID-19, a new normal, so to say. Okay? Now, the question for us is, are we addressing the problem of infrastructure? Yes, I can tell you that the Nigerian government has been doing that before COVID-19 came.
Okay. That's right.
And if you look at our roads all over Nigeria, we see signature of the federal government in all federal roads in the 36 states of the federation. So, like I must also mention this, we are not politicians here. We are simply professionals and analysts. So we stick with data. All right? We don't deal with the sentiments and we don't deal in political statements. So the question for Nigeria, and we put this also, be a consult before Buhari in 2015. We were privileged. Somebody called me and said, he happened to be a chieftain of APC, and that a week to President Buhari's inauguration, May 29, 2015, what will I, as a professional economist, want him to tell Nigerians he will do for us? So and I said, okay, no problem. I mean, it's something I've been doing for years and for different governments and presidents. Okay, so I said, give me your email address. But one major thing that connects infrastructure is power, all right, which is the major constraint to business in Nigeria. But that's a major element in the cost of doing business. And what I gave to President Buhari then is that if they want the power dynamics to change, all they need to do is to instruct the distribution companies to meter all their consumers. And I said simply, this is the way it will play out. You know, in economics, you say something, that people respond to incentives. Okay? It's a principle in economics. But right. This is not a direct incentive, but rather it is pointing them in the direction of what to do to ensure that they make more money. I said, if they meter all consumers, their revenue will drop. Because what they will get now will be a reflection of the power they deliver. All right? And I said, because they are business people who are in business to make money, that will make them look back along the power chain. All right? Instead of looking at themselves as merely distributing, they will see the entire value chain of power supply. And then begin to worry about TCN that transmits the power. They will also worry about the GenCos that generate the power. But for now, they see themselves as exclusive. And in fact, there's even complaint that the little money they collect from all the consumers, they don't deliver to the bucket where all of them in that chain are supposed to draw from. So, and that is the challenge we face. So, and that is still my recommendation today. If every consumer is metered, and we have seen that demonstrated, if you go to some estates now in Lagos, where they have prepaid meter, preponderantly, power supply is more steady there.
That's right. And
the moment you achieve that, certainly that will impact the cost of doing business. Now, corruption, BA mentioned 4 years ago when Nigeria entered recession in 2016, that it is one of the 5 reasons we entered recession. Recession didn't come because Buhari became our president. Okay? There were 5 issues that Nigeria had failed to address over decades. We've talked about a few of them here. One of them is our dependence carbons for foreign earnings. Okay? Another one is the fact that we depend on imports. I've mentioned that as well. Yet another one is what we call rent-seeking attitude, in which case that translates also into a 4th one that we call low productivity. It's only in Nigeria somebody will wake up in a day and pray to God that God will give me small work, and in return for the small work, give me big money. That is a statement that says we are not productive. In economics, it is an exchange of value for value. So when you begin to say you want to do small work and get plenty of reward in return for the work, that means you are not productive. A productive person will say, Touchstone will deliver service to his clients and give them value for their money. And it is the value for money that will make those clients come back to Touchstone. And they will also convert those clients into marketers that are not on Touchstone's payroll. These people will now go out to tell other people about Touchstone. Okay? I imagine anyone coming for this particular discourse today, we want to be a part of any discourse Touchstone puts forward.
That's right.
That is just it. Okay? Part of it is corruption. Until we cut the head of corruption, we cannot develop as a nation. And as Mr. Ojo remarked, that is why people are always wary anytime you talk about borrowing. But what some of us have done as professional economists to tell our government that borrowing going forward should not be to pay for the current spending. That's where the problem is. That if we must borrow at all, let's borrow for capital purposes. And that is for projects. Like I told President Yar'Adua in 2008, I gave him an idea and the man took it. Despite that, I had no direct relationship with him. Like this converse now, this discourse now, I floated the idea. And Yar'Adua's government picked it up. And I said that when President Obasanjo was campaigning for you, that Nigeria should vote for you to be our president. One of the things he told us was that you were a very prudent man. And that when you left Katsina as governor, that you left 6 billion naira in the treasury of Katsina State. I now told President Yar'Adua then that, listen, we did not vote for you in order for you to save money for Nigeria. We voted for you to use our money to build roads, to build schools, to build hospitals, to ensure that we have infrastructure that will make this economic thrive. That Nigerians don't care about who is sick in Aso Rock. Insofar as where Touchstone is, where every one of us is, we can do business. And then our respective families, we can take care of our families. So it doesn't matter who sits in us or not. If the right policies and the right expenditures are engaged in. So that was what we put before him. But I now told him something very significant, which he did. And it's only now we're still pushing our government to do the same. Yeah, I did that 12 years ago. And what I told him then was this, that look, all our ministers, they should be given targets the way we do in the private sector. In which case, don't measure a minister by the fact that end of the year, he finished the budget allocation to his ministry. No. Measure a minister by what he or she delivers. If we gave a certain budget to the Minister of Works, that budget also defines how many kilometers of roads he should build and how many bridges he should deliver. That therefore we should measure Minister of Works by the number of bridges and roads that he delivers with the money we gave to him. And then serve for power. And that was 1 year ago implemented immediately. In our work of Vision 2020, what we actually envisioned for Nigeria was that by this year, we'll be producing and distributing 40,000 megawatts of power. That is what would drive this economy to become number 20 in the world by year 2020. And that will also help us to grow in an inclusive way. To grow inclusively means we are growing and creating jobs. So you can see that all these questions are interrelated. All right? That's right. So what I told you about then was that if we are envisioning 40,000 megawatts by year 2020, here we were in year 2008 beginning. I said, give a target to the power minister that every year between 2008 and 2020, that will be 13 years, Nigeria should add 3,000 megawatts annually. As at the end of 2007, we were at 3,200 megawatts of power. It unfortunately is around the figure we are still struggling with today, 13 years after. Okay? So, Yar'Adua took that advice without knowing me personally. The idea got to him and he took it. For those who remember this history of Nigeria, in 2008, and that is the only government so far that has given such target to a minister. Yar'Adua gave the Prime Minister, then Babalola, I still remember his name, he gave him a target of 6,000 megawatts for 2008. So the idea came from me. I simply said, if we had 3,200 then, if he added 3,000 to that, and we sustained that for 13 years, they would have added 39,000 to 3,200 that we had at that time. And that would take us above 40,000 megawatts that we envisioned for this year. So by now, we wouldn't even be talking about unemployment. If we follow that pattern also, we wouldn't be talking about poor state of our roads, or talking about our educational system, or the health system. We wouldn't need to spend as much as we are spending now. Federal government put out 500 billion naira for the health sector. Central Bank did a similar thing. A lot of money is going from there. But the worry, as Mr. Ojo said, is will we spend the money on those projects? So quick means we must begin to measure what our public sector officials deliver. If I want thing I've said in the light of COVID-19 that the government should use this opportunity to introduce a policy that will say from the president to the least public sector public servant, everyone should be treated in Nigeria. No medical tourism for public sector employees.
Good.
You know why I'm saying this? Because COVID-19 has proven to us that capacity exists in Nigeria to take care of them. Nobody was thrown out for treatment for COVID-19. In fact, if any attempt was made, they will send you back to your country. Because in their own country, they have enough problems on their hands to solve. Why would you bring your own problem in addition?
Yeah.
So, but if you look at the number of those that contracted it in Nigeria and the number that have survived it, they were all treated here.
That's right.
It was flown abroad. That means that within our system, as poor as it is, there is still capacity to deliver quality healthcare if only we put adequate resources there. So the way to deal with corruption, therefore, is to demand performance. I told that to President Jonathan in 2011 when I was a member of his cabinet. And that was a major weakness of that administration. The president did not demand performance from his officials until we get to that point where there will be no sentiment in keeping you in the office. And that's what we said to the government through the office of the vice president. We gave them, you remember,54 free of charge. Anyway, they didn't pay for it. And we used Fashola's office then as the Minister for Power, Works and Housing. He had 54 job functions under his ministry. And we used that to design a template on how to set target for ministers and how to measure the targets. So if this government wants to really do that, they are empowered by consultants that they didn't pay. We do all this simply because we are Nigerians and want this to change. Until we begin to do that, corruption will remain with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Biodun Addedipe. Please, I just want you to agree that we are going to bring you back and you will oblige us, because I'm sure we don't want to take a whole lot of your time as well as the time of those who have joined us. But there is no doubt that we are going to bring Dr. Biodun Addedipe back. World-class economist, finance and management consultant, chief consultant, Biodun Adedipe Associates, sought-after speaker, a man who is, you can see the depth, you can see a teacher, a university lecturer, a researcher. Thank you very much for joining Touchstone Business Sustainability Series, BSS. We certainly will be glad to have you back, because there's no doubt about it. Dr. Adedipe has so much to share. It's so loaded. And I just hope that people in our nation are taking cognizance of a man of this integrity. I mean, he's not just a man of learning and knowledge, a great intellectual, but a man of great humility and a God-fearing man. Once again, on behalf of all those who have joined us, and on behalf of Touchstone Brand Strategy and Communication, I want to say a word of thanks to Dr. Biodun Addedipe and all of you that have joined us. Thank you very much. We are going to continue this conversation next Saturday. Just watch out for another distinguished leader who will be joining us. We are going to bring Dr. Biodun Addedipe back. I mean, you will agree with me. You know that he has given us. It's like he has just scratched the surface of all that he has, the depth and the breadth of what he has to give us, giving us a sense of how we got to where we are, both from the global perspective as a world-class economist that he is, as well as local realities. And he has given us solutions, what the government should do, what the private sector should do, you know, what companies should do, organizations should do, what the average household, also individuals, should do in ensuring that we create value. And we look at how not just to survive, but to thrive in the new normal. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Biodun Addedipe. We're going to bring this conversation engagement to a close, and we just hope that when we call on you again, you will come back and share with us. Thank you for your time. We can't pay. We can't pay for your time. Thank you very much for and for everyone. Thank you for being with us. I have no doubt that you have had a time, an engaging time. I mean, I wish we could go on and on and on, but we don't want to take a lot of Dr. Biodun Adedipe's time, so that when next we call, you will oblige us. And you too, you can join us as freely as you can. We'll bring this to a close. I want to thank my entire team, the Touchstone team, for all the work done to ensure that this is going on. Again, this is an initiative by Touchstone to ensure that managers, leaders, business leaders, managers of brands know exactly what to do in the uncertainty that we have found ourselves as a result of COVID-19. Thank you. Thank you very much, and God bless you. See you again next Saturday. Thank you, Dr. Addedipe. Appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me send the slide.
Yes, sir. We'll hope to get those slides across to as many people as are on. We'll find a way of getting that done so that everybody will have access to it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. See you. Thank you. We'll make the slides available. Thank you. Thank you. Bye for now. And